Thank you very much, Daniel. It's great to be back in Greece for this conference. So the last panel gave you a pretty positive picture of how technology in general was being used for government. And there's some great examples. It's like this Ukrainian DIA system that was mentioned. So this panel, or I at least, am going to tell you about the bad things in terms of democracy. Before I get to AI, I want to talk about technology in general, because I think that the single thing that has happened as a result of shifting to an online world is the destruction of a common base of empirical knowledge and understanding about the world. And it is very hard to run a democracy if you cannot agree on some basic things like who won the last election. Now, I'm speaking as an American because I think that this process of polarization and democratic decay has actually gone further in the United States than it has in Europe, in most parts of Europe. But it's a warning for the future. So just to give you some examples, if you look at the Republican Party and Republican voters, 70% of them don't believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected president of the United States in 2020. Over half of Republicans believe some version of the narrative that COVID vaccines are more harmful than helpful, and then about 25%, 20 to 25% believe some version of the QAnon narrative that the Democrats are actually drinking the blood of children in tunnels under Washington, D.C. Very outlandish. I think that my definition of what populism is actually has to do with conspiracy theories. That populists believe that the world that you see around you, the legacy media, government institutions, all of the big institutions that define a democracy are actually controlled by a shadowy elite, and that the real truth will only appear if you take the red pill and the scales fall from your eyes and you realize that the world is actually very different from what, for example, you see on network television. And I think that this is really a problem, because if 40% of the American voting public doesn't believe in the legitimacy of the President of the United States, that is a big problem for democracy. And this is a problem that has been created really by this online world. I think that the dilemma that democracies face is that you have to do content moderation if you are one of the big platforms like Google, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. But and just to clarify some things, all of these platforms do content moderation. They have to filter out pornography, graphic violence, very gross forms of online content that nobody wants to see. And they've been doing this right from the beginning. The problem occurs when you get into speech that is politically relevant. Who gets to decide what is true speech or what is misinformation? And this has become hugely controversial in the United States. So is raising questions about vaccine efficacy, is that legitimate democratic speech, or is that misinformation? And Americans were completely polarized in that particular question. And the dilemma for democracy is the following. You don't, generally speaking, want the government to decide what is true information and what is not. You don't want a ministry of truth. On the other hand, I don't think you want a large private platform that is basically interested in maximizing its own profits to be the arbiter of what's true and what's not. And therefore, the two alternatives that are out there, I think, are both unacceptable in democratic terms. I have a solution to this, which we can get into maybe in the discussion, but that's really the dilemma. Now, this is a transition then into the AI question. You cannot do content moderation without artificial intelligence. It's simply impossible. Every day, billions of photos, blog posts, and so forth are uploaded onto these platforms. it is completely impossible for human beings to manage this quantity of data, and therefore they have to use AI in order to do the most basic forms of content moderation. And that suggests that actually we're already living in a world that is deeply infused by AI, and I think that a lot of the attitudes towards AI in both Europe and the United States are driven by our bad experience with social media, that social media, has been weaponized by many bad actors, and that's kind of made us very suspicious of any new technology that comes along. And it's led to a desire to regulate AI, I believe, prematurely. This European Act, AI Act that was referenced in the last panel, really doesn't even start with a catalog of what the harms are that it's trying to avoid. Everybody has a general feeling that this is a dangerous technology that's going to take away your job, but is that really what the object of this kind of regulation is? I also think that at this point, it's very hard to even think about regulating it because the cat is out of the bag. AI is not being produced by 3 or 4 giant companies the way social media is. With open source AI, everybody in the world is working on a smaller language model that builds on the LLMs that exist. Final thing I'll say is there's going to be a lot of difficulty in regulating this phenomenon. I always think that the fears about AI, it's a little bit like saying, well, in 1880, when Thomas Edison had just turned on the first light bulb, asking him, what do you think the consequences of electricity are going to be? Right? In 100 years, what are the consequences? There's simply no way of knowing, and it means that as harms develop and as we develop more information about what specific problems we want to solve that are created by this technology, we are going to have to adjust the social and political rules that surround this technology. And this is not something that can be done by writing a lot of rules in advance. This is the way that bureaucracies typically operate. You're going to need much more discretionary decision-making on the part of regulators that are scrambling to keep up with this technology. So the European regulation, for example, specifies a number of parameters above which you want to regulate a large language model. This is completely crazy to think that you can actually put a number in a regulation right now that won't be made completely obsolete, not in a couple of years, but next week. So I think these are some of the challenges we face, but my personal opinion is we ought to be a little bit, we need to wait and see, and we need to be a little bit less frightened of this particular future that we are about to enter into.